All right, g'day, hi, welcome. Okay, for the sissies who can't handle the 6L6, the mighty 6L6 tubes. All right. A lot of people buy this amp not realizing really what it is. It says hot rod on the front, but they don't understand that it's actually a hot rodded amp. Like, this thing is very different than most normal amps. It is the most popular, to my understanding, it is the most popular tubed amp on the market. But what is different about it is that when I was looking for a tubed amp, okay, first thing I knew was I didn't want a Marshall. I wanted something a little bit more aggressive than a Marshall. Which Marshall? Pick a Marshall. Marshall does not make this. The Fender doesn't make a Marshall. Marshall doesn't make a Fender. Mesa Boogie makes something in between the two of them on steroids. So like, Mesa Boogie takes, or basically Mesa Boogie basically were hot rodded Fender amps is what they were, right? And Marshall had its merits too. So Mesa Boogie went and made something that could do what the Marshall could do, had the smoothness of the Marshall, but the aggressiveness of the Fenders, right? Now, Fender amps are pretty much, if you played one, you kind of played them all, but they're all like slightly different flavors of the same thing. And I know some people will take exception to that, but it's kind of true. If you play a Fender Blues Junior, it really is similar circuitry to that. The tone is that mid-range tone, cuts through whatever. You play a Fender Twin Reverb, it's like these things on steroids. A Fender Twin Reverb is a very sought after amp. I've played through them many times and never owned one, but it was definitely an amp that I would buy over pretty much any Marshall any day for certain things. But then there's this. When these things came out, okay, I guess the idea was to give you an amp that was really focused for live playing. Now, why is that important? Well, what they have is when you're on a dark stage, one nice thing is that, and one thing that makes this amp look so great is that it just looks like a speaker box, right? The audience doesn't see this. But when you're standing there, you don't have to tuck down and look at the front of an amp. It's right there. You can see it. And the next thing is the volumes on these, okay, are linear. So what happens is, instead of just getting, I had it on 12 there, instead of just, okay, a little bit of volume, a little bit of volume, a little bit of volume, and it louder, louder, louder. It's like nothing, then you hit one and it comes on blaring. And then you go from 1 to 2 and it blares again. And then it's not that the like some people say, like the hot rod volume is too touchy. And it's like, it's not touchy, it's linear. Meaning, think of it like, okay, you're on 1, okay, from 1 to 2, it's still 1, but when you hit 2, it's 2. And then from 2 to 3, it's still kind of just 2. And then when you hit 3, bang, you get another boost. So it's kind of like boom. So you're, instead of an even audio taper like this, it's like this, and this, right? And then somewhere around 4, you get almost all the volume of the amp in that 3, 4, and then from 4 to 6, you get a little bit more volume, and then 6 to 12, you get just a little bit more. But the sweet spot of the amp is somewhere around 2.5 to 3 for my ears for most settings. For a clean 2, once you start getting around 3, you just get so much breakup that it's just so harsh at that point, even clean, that like if you're standing in front of it, the louder you go, the less you use the controls. And like the louder you go, usually you put everything to 0, like your bass, your mid, your treble. Like the treble on this thing, if you put it out on 12, you'll shatter your eardrums. It is extremely harsh. But again, this guitar takes care of those, this amp takes care of those guitars that are really anemic and void of you know, they have like really low output pickups. Not necessarily that they sound bad. It's just they have no drive to them. This thing will give you it in spades. So this amp is already starting off with too much, and you have to take it away. If you think of the amp in that sense, rather than trying to give more, you know, if you think about, okay, just take everything away that you don't need, then the amp is amazing. If you're trying to, you know, keep the bass on 10, it doesn't do that thing. Bass on 10 for most guitars is way too muddy, unless you got a really anemic, uh, you know, weak sounding single coil pickup that has no bottom end to it. This will take care of that because it's got it in spades, right? If you got a pickup that just doesn't cut through, well, the mid on this thing will cut through a freaking tank. Like it's. You can have a full Marshall stack, JCM 2000, sitting there cranked full with everything full, okay, and I can guarantee you this thing on 2 or 3 with the mid all the way up will still cut through that. Like it's incredible. Like if you have one of those tone deaf drummers that you know all they know how to do is bash the skins and smack the cymbals as hard as they can, don't worry about it. This amp has got you covered. It'll cut through that guy too. It just cuts through the mix. It's just it's a very mid-range focus amp, and it just cuts right through. And the reason why it cuts through is these bad boys right here, the 6L6 tube, which is a very aggressive, angry sounding tube. I just love it. Like, I just love it. It's not a heavy metal amp at all. Although I'm going to do some experimentations, because most guys buying this amp usually know that this isn't a metal amp. This is kind of like hard rock, classic rock, blues, country, even jazz. It might be a little bit too aggressive for most jazz players, but depending on the pickups, again, when we discuss what guitar is best for this amp, or guitars that are best for this amp. But there's a lot of people buy this amp and they don't know that this thing is really meant to be on a stage and be loud. It's not really meant to be in an apartment. Now, when I bought this, I was living in an apartment, which was fine. But what ended up happening is I had to wait till, you know, like it was a small apartment building. There was only like 4 apartments in there. And usually I knew when everybody was gone, and that's the times I would play this thing. There's no headphone jack. This is a stage amp. It's really always going to be a stage amp. So I see all these people, like they put in, I think it's a 12Y7 instead of the 12AX7. And it knocks like something like 70% of the gain down and takes a lot of volume with it, and then they can play it. But then now you got an amp that has like hardly any gain. So if you're playing clean only, that's fine. But if you're going to lose all the cut through, all the juiciness of the amp. You know, so I see all these guys trying to find ways to neuter the amp. There's adapters you can get, and you can actually run EL84s with these groove tube adapters. I don't have them. You know, like I'm one of those people. If you want a mellow amp, buy a mellow amp. If you don't want a mellow amp, you know, if you want a mellow amp, don't buy a hot rod. You know, like the Fender wasn't lying to you. They called this a hot rod for a reason. It was for the person that wanted more, you know, especially live. Like you wanted the instant response on the throttle here to get the volume right away. You know, get the amp into the sweet spot right away. It doesn't have to be super precise. It just had to, okay, loud enough, not loud enough, right? And that's what this amp does. So for a lot of people that are buying this, I see all kinds of people modifying them, but then they're killing the very thing that the amp was designed to do by mellowing them out. So most of the guys that are buying these, a lot of the guys, they don't play really loud. Like they play, you know, they're kind of adverse to loud playing. You know what I mean? They don't do this stuff, the King Kong sound. They don't do that, right? They do, you know, a couple of jazz chords, you know, a few blues licks, whatever. Nothing that's going to really stand out. But this amp is designed to stand out. So the thing about it is, yes, you can mellow the amp out. You can change the tubes. If I was going to do anything, I'd see if I could find something even more aggressive than these, which I don't think you can. You know, the 6L6 tube is the rip your head off tube, right? It's the go-to tube, right? So for me, I wouldn't want to neuter this thing. I'd want to boost it up. But if you wanted a hot rodded version of the Hot Rod Deluxe, you basically buy the Hot Rod DeVille, which is 60 watts instead of 40. I don't think I mentioned that in the first video. I hope I did. But basically, this is 180 watts in and 40 watts out. So when you crank the throttle on this sucker, you get the full 40 watts, right? And a lot of amps, what happens is like they're 40 watts in and 40 watts out. And by the time you're at full, you're getting maybe 30 watts, you know, because it you know, law of diminishing returns, etc., etc. So this ensures that you get the full 40 watts, which makes it extremely loud for a 40 watt amp. This is louder than most transistor amps that you'll ever hear. The first time you try one is kind of a bit of an experience because it barks at you, the amp, like just it's really, really, really it can be harsh if you're not ready for it. So you have to play around with it to get it to you know, be bearable, you know, at volume. Now, I've never played this one on stage, but I've seen many of these things on stage with many players, and some of the tones that come out of these things, again, once you get used to them, like it's an amp that's, it's not a tight sounding amp, right? But it's an amp that it has a lot of cut through. So each note sounds like you're really beating the shit out of a note, right? Even when you're trying to play softly. So you can get soft sounds out of it, but you really got to play around to